Yeah, good morning. Good morning. You're welcome once again to my YouTube channel. And in this course, we're talking about introduction to microeconomics. We are dealing with introduction to microeconomics. In the previous in the previous uh, uh, session or videos, we talked about the definition, and we also talked about the difference between we also talked about the differences between microeconomics and macroeconomics, uh, as well as the importance. So today we are going to continue from the importance of microeconomics, and we talk about limitation of microeconomics as we continue. So please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more of this video. For more of this video. So, like I said, we were in the importance of microeconomics. We succeeded in discussing or mentioning and discussing some of them. The first one was price determination. The second was the understanding of the working of free market economy. The third one was utilization of resources. And the fourth one, model building, that microeconomics helps in model building. Now, that is where we want to continue. When we say microeconomics helps in model building, what do we imply? It simply means that microeconomics helps in the understanding of various complex economic situations by presenting these economic situations in a simple model or in simple models, mathematical, algebraic, or uh, otherwise. So, microeconomics helps in simplifying complex economic situations. For instance, when we talk about the factors that determines an individual's demand, the factors that determines an individual's demand. From our preliminary or our elementary studies, you discover that we say factors that determine demand. One is price of the commodity. Two, price of other related commodity. Three, taste and preference of the individual. Four, we say um, income of the individual. There is the issue of government policies. There is a factor like seasons and weather conditions, and so on. Now, these factors all affect the quantity demand of a particular commodity by an individual. But how they affect the demand differs. And to understand the relationship that exists between them is usually complex. So, microeconomics, for instance, helps you to narrow down and simplify this complex problem by reducing the factors in some cases, and even when you want to use all the factors, by presenting them in a simple model so that you can understand it or understand the relationship between them easily. Now, how do you do that? The quantity of goods and services that an individual will buy can be represented as Q or QX. If the quantity is X, we say QX. It's a function of all these factors that determine it, which is, for instance, price of the commodity can be given as PX since the commodity in question is X. So price of the commodity can be given as PX, price of other commodities can be given as PY, taste and preference can be given as T, income of the consumer can be given as I or Y or I, let's just say I. Government policies can be given as G. Fashion can be given as F. Season or weather can be given as maybe S or W. So now, in a simple form, what you just have is QX equal to F into bracket PX, comma, PY, comma, I, comma, G, comma, F, comma, S, and the rest, close bracket. Now, you have just simplified the relationship between quantity demand and the factors that determine them, particularly in multivariate situation. So, microeconomics can give you uh, single variate analysis where you just focus on quantity demand as a function of price, or it will give you multivariate analysis where you capture all the factors that determines demand, quantity demand. So this is how it is done. In fact, there will be a class, a lecture that will be done on models in microeconomics. Models in microeconomics. So look out for that too. Then the fourth importance of microeconomics is that it helps in taking business decisions. Microeconomics is very important in business decisions. Of course, microeconomics concerns individuals and firms. So, a clear understanding of the microeconomic environment or the microeconomic analysis will help businesses to be able to take sound decisions, also business decisions that will lead to effective and efficient utilization of resources, and at the same time satisfaction of consumers, because these two things, while business is trying to minimize its cost and maximize profit, they have to do that with the consciousness that the consumers are there to maximize their satisfaction. Now that consciousness will drive the businesses to analyze their consumers bit by bit, segment by segment. So this is why microeconomics is very important to the firm, and of course to the government, which is the fifth one. Microeconomics is very, very important to the government in decision making, because like I said, if you do not understand how a particular situation affects individuals, you may not have a good picture of how it affects the entire population. So it is actually a tool for the government to understand the behavior of the individual economic units, so that they can make policies that will ensure that every individual is captured, or policies that are fair to every individual in the country. And these policies are policies such as taxation, taxation policies, price policies, and maybe expenditure policies. When you understand the individuals, the behavior of the various individual economic units in the country, it will help the government so much. Remember, the government is not just interested at the household level; they are also interested at the behavior of the firms and the industries at the industrial level. So it's very important. The government wants to also know the behavior of of the the firms in the industry, so that it will know how to capture them, in its policies, of course, because that is the function of the government. Now, we, despite all these advantages and more, there are limitations. Microeconomics is said to have some limits or some constraint. You understand? One of these limitations is on its assumption. Number one, unrealistic assumptions in microeconomics. Unrealistic assumptions in microeconomics. Some of the assumptions in microeconomics have been termed to be unrealistic by some scholars. For instance, in our discussion, we mentioned full employment in the economy. It is a microeconomic assumption, but it is a very, very unrealistic assumption to say that all the resources in the economy are gainfully utilized. It's unrealistic. That is what John Maynard Keynes said about microeconomics. Those in your microeconomics was, in fact, economics generally was once studied as microeconomics. It was usually at micro level. You understand? So macroeconomics got introduced somewhere along the line, which is traceable to John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression, when he had to, wade into the economic situation through his theories, as a result of the failures of the um, traditional forces of demand and supply, the law of forces of demand and supply, and all of those things. So the failure of microeconomics to cater for the situation at the time, macroeconomic principles to solve the problems at the time, led to macroeconomics. So, and part of those discussion was that part of those theories from observation from Keynes is that there cannot be full employment. That what is regarded to as full employment is like to assume that we do not have difficulties. To assume that there is full employment that can be a full employment in the economy is to assume that we don't have difficulties, or to assume our difficulties away. To assume our difficulties away. The second limitation also based on what? The assumptions, particularly the assumption of a laissez-faire. The assumption of laissez-faire. That assumption says there should not be interference by government or units of policy units of the economy, believing that the forces of demand and supply will gradually bring any differences or any gap that exists in the economy to a close. For instance, we all know that when there is increase in price, demand will reduce, and vice versa. So what happens is that, yes, the law holds most of the time for most commodities and so on. So as the demand reduces, it further goes ahead to reduce price somehow and increases demand in the long run. So, but during the Great Depressions in the 1930s, the Great Depression in the 1930s, this theory did not hold. That John Maynard Keynes have to advocate for intervention of government in economic activities through taxation and government expenditure. And that sort of like solved the problem at the time. So it is said that the assumption of laissez-faire, which is a peculiar assumption to microeconomics, is unrealistic. That is another limitation. That is another what? Limitation. The third limitation is that microeconomics is concerned with the study of parts and neglects the whole. It deals with economic indices in isolation without taking into account the impact of other indicators. By implication, microeconomics end up presenting an imperfect and imprecise picture of the economy. What do we mean by this? What do we mean by this? When we talk about the factors that determined, when we talk about the factors that determine quantity demand of a particular commodity, we said we usually go for price. But when I listed them out earlier, we discovered that we have multiple factors that affect demand. But in microeconomic analysis, we always look at price. As the price of egg increases, the quantity demand of individual household reduces or decreases. But most of the time, we don't try to understand, okay, what if the price of egg increases, but the income of the individual increases, and the price of other substitute product that you can substitute for egg now increases. Invariably, for some reason, the consumer will stick to consumption of egg. Or, in fact, a factor that is not usually captured in as a factor that determines the quantity demand of a particular commodity is health. Health, whereby people's health condition can determine the quantity of goods, of a particular good that they buy, that they demand. Talking about this egg, for instance, at certain age level or so, and following some health analysis from medical professionals, they could limit your egg consumption. So no matter how much your money increases, no matter how much the price of egg reduces, you are not going to buy them, much of it. So you can see, it is simply because microeconomic analysis tend to limit its observations or analysis to just parts. Then the last one is that microeconomic is not only inadequate but also misleading in its analysis of problems, because certain principles are true in the case of a particular household, firm, or industry, but it may not be true in the economy as a whole. So this is where we come to the end of the introductory class to microeconomics. In our next class, we will be talking about model and how it affects microeconomic analysis. Thank you very much and see you in the next class.